Is it what? Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming. We are looking at Parshat Ki Tavo. I've titled the shir "The Journey of Gratitude," from words to action, and you'll see. Hopefully, we will try and go on a journey from the concept of what we mean by Hakaras Hatov, Hakarat Hatov, what it means to really recognize and understand, and how fundamental the concept of gratitude is to us as a people, and how we take that through the parsha, not just from the beginning part, which is the obvious part as we'll see, but also later on as well. Ki Tavo, the positioning of Parsha Ki Tavo in the Torah is very important to understand. We had last week the parsha of, and we explained, we brought Rav Hirsch, that Shoftim is much more about the mitzvot that apply to the Jewish people as a whole, the rules around the king, the judges, etc., etc. Ki Teitzei is very much more specific about individuals and the responsibilities they have as a people when they enter the land, but it's much more about the personal, not entirely, there are exceptions, but pretty much that's the case. When you come to Ki Tavo, we have the transition in this week's parsha to the final words of Moshe Rabbeinu. Although there's still a few more to go, you trace it through. Once you get to this parsha, you have the bulk of the parsha, of course, is taken up with the tochacha, the admonition, right? The majority of the parsha is taken up with that. And then once you get to Nitzavim, Vayelech, it's the final covenant, it's the Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, you're standing here today, and this is always, this is the last days of Moshe, the last day, etc., etc., Hazinu, the song of Hazinu, and then the blessing at the end. So we're really building up here to those final words. Why is that significant? It's significant because the two mitzvot that appear at the beginning of this week's parsha are both, the common denominator between them is they are both reflective. They are reflective. They are positioned in the Torah at a place where it is the right almost at the end. So they are, and therefore it's a position of, if you like, final reflections. And they occupy a space where they're designed to inculcate within the people the importance of reflection, the importance of looking backwards, the importance of understanding the journey you've been on to get to this point. So do you understand what I mean? So although these two mitzvot carry forwards into the future, they apply. The mitzvah of Bikurim, the requirement to bring the first fruits, and also the second one in the parsha, which is Vidui Ma'aser. It's the confession that a person has to do once every 3 years to declare that they've brought all the correct tithes that they need to give, as we'll see. But these are both reflective. These are points where a person takes a step back and says, this is the journey I've been on. And as we'll see, that is a critical thing to do. And it fits, the positioning in the Torah fits as well. And we'll develop this further as we go along. The first mitzvah we'll look at is that first mitzvah in the parsha, mitzvah of Bikurim. The farmer brings first fruits to the temple and he makes a declaration. And within that declaration, he declares and states the journey he has been on personally and we have been on collectively as a nation. What the Kli Yakar does, quoted the Kli Yakar many times, 17th century, the Rav of Prague, the Kli Yakar, in his inimitable way, always got a tremendous way of framing ideas and concepts in the Torah so powerfully. He says that you find the phrase used in this first pasuk, which says, "V'hayoki savoy al haaretz," when you come into the land, "Asher Hashem Elokecha nosein l'cha nachalo," that Hashem is giving to you as an inheritance, "V'rishta," and you shall inherit it, "V'yoshavta ba," and you dwell within it. That phrase, he says, "V'rishta v'yoshavta ba," you find twice in the Torah. Look what he says. Lo motzinu, after the bold print, for number 1. Lo motzinu loshen v'rishta. We don't find that phrase, v'rishta, you shall inherit it, v'yoshavta ba, and you shall dwell in it, ki im kan of a parshas hamelech. Only twice in the Torah do you find this phrase. You will inherit it and you will dwell in it, and that is here, and in the parsha in which they are required to give a king, when the instructions are given, that when the people demand a king, these are the rules around giving a king. That was in Parsha Shoftim. Why? Because after the Jewish people have settled the land and they've inherited it, Yishman Yisrael v'Yavad. There comes a time when the Jewish people feel very comfortable. This is a phrase which comes from later on in Hazinu, Yishman Yisrael, Yeshurun, etc. They become, literally means they become fattened up and they become used to luxuries, etc. And then they come to rebel. What they do is they request a similar identity to the nations of the world. They require and they wish to become, have similar ruling systems as the rest of the world. So that makes sense when it comes to the king, right? Yeah, that the moment when they're going to request a king is when they become settled and become inherited the land and dwelling in it, and they're comfortable, and they say, we quite like the idea of a king. Moab has a king, Ammon has a king. Why can't we have a king as well? That fits. What is going on here? What is the parsha of Bikurim, the first fruits that the farmer brings to the temple? What is that got to do with this? Kachi says, "But parshas Bikurim." What is going on here with the parsha Bikurim? The intention was lahachnia rum levavam, to make sure that they understand their position, to just temper that possible pride and haughtiness that they have. That after getting to that position and after inheriting the land, they will say, it's all ours, it's all mine, everything is owned by us. And we always have and we will inherit it just by the sword. And they will end up forgetting Hashem. And that is why you have the same phraseology here. It will be when you come into the land that Hashem has given to you a nachala, an inheritance. And that word is very specific. In other words, before you have the words virishta, v'yoshavta ba, and you inherited, what word precedes the inheritance? The word nachala. The word nachala. And that is significant. Kippur Emes, he says in truth, lo b'turas Yerusha ata bo'el ha'aretz. You have to understand, Hashem is saying, that you do not come into the land through a position of inheritance. That means entitlement. Kibayas v'hoi nachlas ovos. Here, possessions, a house, that is something which one can inherit. But the land is given to you as a gift. In order to return, repay, to keep the commandments, to keep the mitzvot, to understand who you are and the position that you have, the responsibilities. But you won't look at it this way. You will look at it as Yerusha, as a Yerusha, as inheritance. So, you will take hold of it as if it's an inheritance from your ancestors. And you will dwell in it, but just as someone who is almost like a temporary, someone who sojourns. Not like it says, he brings a pasuk in Vayikra, that the idea that the Torah says, that you are toshavim. It's in I think what he's trying to say is that you are misunderstanding the fact that actually your inheritance and your position in it is dependent on me and is dependent on my will and your relationship with Hashem. So what the Kli Yakar has done is highlighted for us that within this first pasuk there's a tension. There's a tension that has always existed from the moment we entered the land. What is the tension? The tension is between these two words, Nachala and Yerusha. There's a difference between them. A Yerusha is something which you get as entitled. You know it's coming. It's an inheritance. A Nachala is something else. A Nachala is like a river. There are various other interpretations and explanations as to why Nachala is different, and Nachala is different to a Yerusha, where it's used in the Torah, what context, etc., etc. But one way is that it's something that flows. It's like a river that flows towards you, but it's not a Yerusha. It's not a Yerusha. It's something which you are able to take hold of. But at the same time, it's not something which comes through that sense of entitlement. There's a need to repay in that way. And therefore, the problem is, the concern is that you might forget Hashem. And therefore, what is the antidote to this? Therefore, that is why we have the mitzvah of Bikurim, the first fruits. The first fruits are not just a once yearly occurrence, although that is when they need to be done, they're once a year. But it is an object lesson in what your attitude towards the land must be. And now we understand why it's here. We understand why the positioning is here. Right at this end point, at the introduction to the end part of Sefer Devarim. V'chim pirush Rambam. And this is what the Rambam says as well. She'ekata mitzvah zu ha'achna. That the main purpose is to understand the commitment that we need, the humility that we need to serve Hashem. And what is the way? How do we see this? How do we see that this is in fact the purpose? Because, let's paraphrase a little what he says now. He says that what the farmer needs to do, as let's just see, look at the Pesukim, you take from the first fruits that you bring that the land produces. We know this is the 7 species, the Shivas Haminim, and you put it in a basket, you go to the place that Hashem has chosen to dwell there. And the Mishnah describes how this would take place, and there'll be a whole entourage, and they would sit, and as they would journey towards Yerushalayim, it's an incredibly beautiful description of the journeying towards Jerusalem in ancient times with the first fruits. They would rest in the cities, they would stay overnight in the town squares in each city as they would get closer and closer to Jerusalem, and they would say, Kumu v'na'ala beis Hashem, let us get up together and go towards the house of Hashem, and everyone would appreciate it, and there would be a journey that they would go on. And then it says, you will come to the good question, right?
Yeah, follows me every year.
Okay. Right.
Torah doesn't waste words.
Yeah.
So what on earth is the significance of the word tenor?
A tenor, a basket.
Why?
What?
I mean, is it saying that if we had this mitzvah today and we can leave it in a Tesco bag, it would be treif?
Yeah, there's specific rules around how you're supposed to bring it. Yeah.
Why?
So again, this is all. There's a lot. This is Mishnayos and Bikurim talked about the different ways it's presented, to pay with the different baskets that we use. Person who is rich and a person who is poor. There's significance to the basket, right? The way it's presented and how and what, whatever, and social positioning in society. Take a look at the Mishnayos. I think it talks about the basket. Okay, so this is if I remember correctly. But yes, there is a significance to the basket, and it's a fair question. But just to come to this point about what is going on here, it says, you shall come to the Kohen who is in that day, and it says, but Martzoi love, I'm in Pasuk Gimel, verse 3, you shall say to him, Higadati ayom l'Hashem Elokecha. I have, literally it means, I have told, I have said, I have made a declaration to Hashem, ki vosi el haaretz, or that I am doing this, that I have come into the land, asher nishba Hashem la'avoseinu aseslonu, that Hashem has given to us. So this word, Haggadah, is very important. We know why, because Haggadah means a lot to us, right? Haggadah shel Pesach, we'll see, right? So these, according to the Kli Yakar, this word Higadati, this is what tells us everything we need to know about this mitzvah. Third line in the second paragraph. Higadati loshen avar. It's the past tense. Why is it not the future tense? It should be, right? What's the past? V'alo adayin lo higid klum. He hasn't said anything yet. Higadati hayom. I have today declared. You haven't said anything yet. He will do. He's going to say the words that we say in the Haggadah, Arami Ovei Davi, right? He's going to say that. That's the way we take it from. The whole parsha, as we'll see, from the Haggadah, the key element of the Haggadah of Pesach is from this week's parsha. The declaration, this is what happened. We went down to Egypt. We were enslaved. Hashem took us out. The journey. But this point doesn't make sense, it would seem. He hasn't said anything yet. Elo Shorutz Eloimar, he says that it means like this. Shebahalicha v'havozu, that on this journey, this bringing of the Bikurim, Kvar doma ki'ilu higadati. It should be as if I've already said everything that needs to be said. Derech vidui, as a way of confession. Ki bosi elor, as they've come into the land. Lo b'toras Yerusha ki ba'ofen zeh shenish b'Hashem la'avoseinu lo seslonu. Not as an inheritance, but in a way, an understanding, a recognition that Hashem has given it as a promise to our ancestors. It's a beautiful idea, he's saying. This person has said nothing. And he's already made the biggest declaration of all. What is that? By bringing the fruits. Because he is doing the action, and that's why the title is From Words to Action. Because he's doing the action of bringing the Bikurim, he's made the biggest declaration. Yes, he has to say something, and there's a thing to do, and there's a service, and there are words. But the key Haggadah is actually the action. That is the public, that is the declaration. And he says, Umeid ani al atzmi, I am testifying about myself, ba'avoas ha-Bikurim, through bringing the Bikurim that Hashem has given the land to us as a gift. And that's why it says you shall take from the first fruits. It doesn't say you shall give. Why doesn't it say you shall give? These problems are so obvious when you call them out, right? What does it say? It says v'lokachto meireshis, and you shall take from the first fruits. Why doesn't it say you shall give from the first fruits? That's what you're doing, right? You're giving, taking. So, okay, you know what it means. You take the fruit to give it, but it's easier, simpler to say, you shall give from the first fruits of your land. That would work fine in the Hebrew, and it would be a simpler way of saying it. And he says the answer is, why doesn't it say this? That from these first fruits that you bring to the house of Hashem to give thanksgiving and honor to Hashem, mimenu, from it, tikach. That's how you're entitled to take the rest of the fruit. You know why it says v'lokachta meireshis, and you shall take from the first fruits? Because you bring these, and that's what enables you to take everything else. Otherwise, how do you have an entitlement to the rest of your land, right? Unless you appreciate where you've come from, unless you appreciate your position, your relationship with the land, that it is a gift from Hashem, then how can you take anything else? You have missed the point. You missed the point, you don't understand, you're taking it as a Yerusha entitlement. It's not an entitlement. It is something which Hashem has given as a gift. And that's how you take the rest of the land. And that's how it is. And therefore he says, since you, it's only called your land after bringing the first fruits, and then you're able to. That's why it says, you shall take from the first fruits, asher tavi me'artzecha, that you bring from your land, because it's at that moment that it becomes your land. Me'artzecha. As soon as you are able to take some of the fruit and bring it to Hashem, that is the moment when it becomes your land. Until that moment, it doesn't do that. There's a huge amount of significance in this Kli Yakar, many different angles to it. The power of what he's saying about what actions represent is very significant. When we come to express gratitude, what we learn from this mitzvah is that words are not enough. That you do something. The words are much more. The action is much more powerful than words, and they speak louder than words. The Sephorno understands. I haven't got it on the sheet, that the word Haggadah, lahagid, is actually almost like a public declaration, and that's really what's happening here. And it's interesting because we use that word on Pesach as well, and it is almost like a communal declaration. That's what we're doing. We're declaring our journey that we've been on, and that is very significant. It also helps us understand, because you take a step back and ask, why is this so important? Why is it so important that we understand this is our relationship with the land? Because everything about our relationship with the land can only be understood on the supernatural level. Meaning, if we relate to the land of Israel as any other land, as historically in Tanakh, you look through it, that's always when there's been a problem. When the Jewish people are able to appreciate the fact that our relationship with the land is supernatural, it is because, and that's why Rashi says this at the beginning of the Torah, right? That's why the Torah begins with Bereshis, because it helps. We need that to understand that journey as to how we inherited the land of Israel. Unless we have that understanding, we cannot develop the relationship in the way it's meant to develop between us and the land itself. So this is what the Kli Yakar says, and this is the journey of gratitude that he puts us on, and this whole parsha is meant to help us understand. Why is it that you have this close link between the Bikurim, the first fruits, and Pesach? And the reason why there's a close link is because we know the words of the Haggadah are from the parsha of Bikurim, right? Arami Ovei Dovi. Now, how do we translate Arami Ovei Dovi?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So we know how the Haggadah translates it, right? Arami Ovei Dovi. Who's the Aramean? According to the Haggadah, is Lavan. Ovei Avi pursued my father. Okay, that's the Haggadah's explanation of the Haggadah is effectively the most of the Haggadah is a midrashic commentary, early midrash, and explains the Aramean is Lavan, right? Lavan bikesh la'akar zakol. Lavan wanted to uproot everything, etc. Shneamar Arami Ovei Dovi. Many of the commentaries on the parsha understand it in a simpler way. Who was Arami Oved Avi? And Rashi here, by the way, does bring the Haggadah's explanation. Rashi brings the Haggadah's explanation, but many other commentaries understand that the simple translation of Arami Ovei Dovi, again, it's not on the sheet, is Yaakov himself. Yaakov himself was a wandering Aramean. Yaakov went to Aram to find a wife. Oved or Aveda, he's wandering, he's lost. Arami Oved Avi. And my father was a wandering Aramean who then ended up going down to Egypt, etc., which probably is the simple explanation of what the verse means, right? But either way, and of course there's no contradiction, you can have multiple different explanations, that's how Chazal understood in different ways. But the point is that it's a journey, and that's what the farmer has to do. Says the Abarbanel on his commentary on the Haggadah, he has a commentary on the Haggadah called the Zevach Pesach, and he explains to us very clearly the link and why it is we use these psukim on Pesach. Now, you can say, well, simply because this is the succinct development of the story, right? These psukim, these verses, they tell the story. We went down to Egypt and Hashem saved us, etc. But the Abarbanel says it's much deeper than that. On this night of Pesach, we have a responsibility to thank Hashem for everything that has transpired to us. We have to begin with the problem episode, everything that went wrong. And we know this from Haggadah, and you've got to end with a positive, right? famous machlokas, Rav and Shmuel, does that mean negative or not? What's the negativity? Is the negativity the spiritual side that we were idol worshippers? Is it the fact that we were enslaved, etc.? This is well known. Lochein, therefore, Roha Magid. Therefore, the one who is the teller of the Haggadah, the relator of the Haggadah, the Shelo Yuchal Odom La'asos Soido Yosa Aguna. He refers to the Magid as the one who is. We say Magid is that section of the Haggadah, right? So the one who tells the story that we use. That a person is unable to find a better and more fitting story and description of the story of the Exodus than the one that the person who brings Bikurim, the first fruits, says. There is nothing better. Why? Because it's the same story. It's the same journey. That is what this person does. This farmer begins with how difficult things were, and he ends up with how good things are. He mentions the Exodus, and all the plagues and everything, all the wonders and signs. What a person is meant to do on the night of Pesach with those items on the Seder plates. He has to imagine if it is the one that you have gone on that actual journey, that it's a physical journey, it's an action, it's not just words, and it's like you're bringing the first fruits. And that's why he says, you say the same thing, exactly the same words, as the one bringing the Bikurim. What is the Abarbanel trying to convey here? He's trying to help us understand that, yes, on Pesach we have the public journey, the story of our people, but it's private, it's personal, it's not about the people as a whole. A person, the journey that we are meant to go on is the same one as the farmer. The farmer has worked the entire year. He has worked so hard on the land. He's put all his efforts into the land. The natural outcome for the farmer is to do what? And to say, wow, I worked really hard. I put all my efforts in and look what I've made. Look what I've produced. That's normal. That's natural. That's the natural thing that a person would do. Look, my efforts have really, really paid off. And it's at that moment that the Torah says, no, you misunderstood. The reason why, yes, you've had to put in all these efforts. We don't negate your efforts. But you need to acknowledge the gift and the gift that you have and the gift that you have from Hashem in order to reach this moment in time. And that's what we do on Pesach. We acknowledge the gift that we have to be part of this people, to go on this journey. And that is a journey which has its difficult and low points and challenging aspects. But at the same time, we are able to be Messiah B'Shvach. How can we be Messiah B'Shvach? Sometimes we don't always feel we can be Messiah B'Shvach. That means we finish on a high note. It doesn't always feel like that we're on a high point. Sometimes we feel on a low point. And the answer is, presumably, that is again another lesson of the Bikurim. You think the farmer who comes is everything's wonderful for him? He's probably worried, maybe he's worried about next year's crop. Maybe this crop wasn't as good as it was the year before. Maybe he's worried about his finances for the year ahead. There could be all sorts of things going through his mind. But Hashem says, the Torah tells us, no, you have to pause. You have to pause for gratitude. You have to pause to give hodah, to give thanksgiving. And unless you feel indebted, unless you feel that it's been given to you as a gift, you will never be able to really express gratitude if you feel it's magiali, if you feel it's all my entitlement. Yeah.
A couple of questions which I hope are relevant. The first thing is, this entirely assumes that the farmers are having bountiful crops every year. But we know from Tanakh that there were many, many years when they were basically at starvation level.
Does it mean, but they would still have presumably something to bring, but that only enhances the point. Meaning that there may be situations where it isn't easy for the farmer to express himself in such an exuberant manner, but he still has the responsibility to bring Bikurim, to bring the first fruits, if he has them. Yeah.
If he has them.
Maybe
precisely.
he doesn't have any. Yeah.
And the second thing is, this whole process of Bikurim, it seems that it disenfranchises all those people in Eretz Israel who weren't farmers.
That's interesting. That's a much broader question, I think, which expands beyond the Bikurim. They expand those who are not part of the, broadly speaking, agricultural society. How do they relate to the agricultural aspects of the mitzvah? We can ask the same things in many different ways. The agricultural elements that to do with the 3 foot festivals, how do we relate to them? We're not agriculturalists. So it's a much bigger question than...
Sorry.
No, it's a great question. It's an excellent question. What I'm just saying is a broader question than just the Bikurim. There are many other things as well. And the next mitzvah, which we'll talk about now, has the same question surrounding it as well. That means to say the person who brings tithes. has to make these declarations. I've done my responsibilities and I've done it. But what about the person who doesn't have that responsibility? The balabatish answer, as they say, the simple answer is that, broadly speaking, it was predominantly an agricultural society. So there were many, many, many people involved in this way of life. And those who weren't might have been, for example, the tribe of Levi, who have other duties. They're the teachers and they're looked after by everyone else. We know they're not serving as farmers. But also you can understand it that the manner in which the Jewish people enter the land, the lifestyle they set up, the fact that they live in this way is not only a lesson for the person bringing the first fruits. And we know that from Chazal, we know that from the Mishnah, the description of the Bikurim became a community-wide affair. So that even though it's the actual farmers who have the obligation, but the rest of society support them in this, they learn the lesson of what the farmers are doing. There's more to say on it, but that's the basics of it. One more point on the Bikurim, and that is the Netziv. Rav Talik Yehuda Berlin, his commentary, 19th century commentary on the Hamek, called the Hamek Dov on the Chumash, has a very, very one-line comment, which is actually very deep and cryptic, I think, but it's worth mentioning. The last thing, after the farmer makes the declaration, the Pasuk says in verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'samachto b'chol hatov, you shall rejoice in all of the good, asher nasan lecha Hashem Elokecha le'veisecha, all the positive things that you have in your household, atov v'halevi v'hager b'sher b'kirvecha, everyone amongst you, and there's significance here, as with everything and every word that's chosen. The Levi and the Ger are those who would not, really should be the ones who are not bringing Bikurim. So Rashi says the Levi might have an obligation. If there were things planted within their cities, then the Levi would have crops to bring. The Ger, the convert, how can he even make this declaration? And the Mishnah talks about this. He is Mevi ve'eino kore. He brings the Bikurim, but he can't say, Arami oved avi, asher nasata la'avosein, you gave our ancestors, because he converted. Yet, the way this pasuk is structured is in such a way that, on the contrary, they are consumed and they are meant to celebrate together, which is quite interesting in relation to your question. What does the Netziv tell us? He says, "V'somachto b'chol hatov," you shall rejoice in all the good. Shel hanefesh v'haguf yachad. Yeah, you see this number 3, hanefesh v'haguf yachad. That means the soul and the body together, and that's what it means. Hainu. This is what it means. He says in the words, "Asher nosan lecha Hashem Elokecha," that Hashem your God has given you. What does it mean Hashem your God has given you? Sha'atom margish gedulas hanefesh be'elokus. That you represent, you understand, you recognize the greatness of the soul in its connection to Hashem. Now, I'm sure he means something deeper than this, and there are probably multiple ways to understand what he's trying to say. But on a basic level, what I think he's trying to convey here is, when it says you shall rejoice in all of the goodness, it means you are able to rejoice because you've unified your physical activity, you've unified the guf, the physical work, the labor, the fact that you've been working the land, all the agricultural stuff and the physicality of your life with something spiritual. You've connected it. By doing this action, by bringing the first fruits to the temple, you've transformed everything you've done into something which makes it a whole, a unity. And the greatest simcha is usually found when there is unity, when things work out and there's a unified whole, the sense of completion, the sense of wholeness. I think this is brought out in other ways as well. The completion, a simcha, there is no greater simcha than something that is complete. Gemara tells us, "Ein simcha ka'atarat hasfeikot." There's no joy as when a doubt is resolved. That means sometimes you want it to be resolved in a better way than it's resolved. But there is a certain contentment when a person is suffering from a terrible dilemma. There is a certain simcha when that's resolved. It could be it wasn't resolved in the way you wanted it to be resolved, but at least there's a relief that that's resolved. The worst thing is waiting for an exam result. Once you get the exam result, then you can deal with the consequences. But you understand, this is what he's saying, and it means that a person has the sensitivity, margish, he is able to feel through this process the greatness of the soul. That means, what is the greatness of the soul? He's able to appreciate that the human capacity for greatness and for growth, for spirituality. This is an ordinary person. This is an ordinary farmer. He's not a person who spends all his day learning or davening and everything else. But the moment he brings the Bikurim and he connects and he stands there and he feels genuine gratitude and he tells his own story and the story of the Jewish people, he suddenly moves himself to a different level and he realizes the greatness of humanity, the greatness of the human being and what a person can become. It's just a beautiful, beautiful idea. We will try and go further. We've not got so much long. So the next parsha is the parsha of Vidui Ma'aser. Right? Vidui Ma'aser is basically every 3 years, a person has this beginning of Sheni, Pasuk Yud Beis, when a person has to make a declaration at the end, in the third year, after the end of the third year, we're not going to go into all the details, basically saying, Biarti HaKodesh min habayis. I have removed all of the things in the house that I needed to deal with. That means to say, I have obligations. My obligations involve giving Truma to the Kohen, right? Ma'aser, the tithe that goes to the Levi. Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe, which I have to take to Yerushalayim. Ma'aser Oni, in the years that it applies, right? There are certain years you have Ma'aser Oni, the tithe that goes to a pauper, and certain years the tithe that you take to Yerushalayim. All of these responsibilities, you make a declaration that you've done. Rav Hirsch says that this is the final mitzvah of what he calls the law giving. Because there are only 2 mitzvot after this, in Parshas Vayelech. And those 2 mitzvot are in a different class of their own. What are the last 2 mitzvot? Yeah, Hakel, the king has to read once every 7 years from Sefer Devarim, the book of Devarim, to the whole congregation. And what is the very last one? To write a Sefer Torah. So Rav Hirsch says those are a different class. Why? Because those are summing mitzvahs. Those are mitzvahs which apply to the whole Torah. They're not the same as they're not the same. Of course, they're equal in terms of the fact that they're a mitzvah. They're one of the 630 mitzvot. But you can see that they have this kind of summing up quality, or they apply to the Torah as a whole. Okay. Now, this is the very last one, therefore, before that. And he says, the idea, is like this. Ma'aser, and this requirement, these are the only mitzvahs about whose faithful fulfillment of the Torah requires a retrospective avowal. There is no other mitzvah that you have to stand after you've done it, and you have a biblical obligation to declare that you've done it right. Think about it. There's no mitzvah after Pesach to make a declaration and say, yeah, I did everything right. I ate the matzah, I ate the marar, I didn't eat chometz. On sukkah, so you don't have to go and say, I built a sukkah, right? Only matzah. Why is this? He says, number one, you see how important it is. You see how important these mitzvot are? The idea of giving and the idea of what it means to give to someone else and to support others and look after others, etc., etc. He also says like this, that there are 3 aspects that are critical things that are taught by these mitzvot, how we are supposed to use our resources. He says like this, there is the spirit, the body, and the welfare of others. Maaser Rishon gives to the Levi, the Levite. And that is meant to understand that we care about our spirit. The Leviim looked after us. How did they look after us? Because they performed the temple service on our behalf, together, right? Kohanim, Leviim. But the Leviim represent that in that way. They support the temple service. They are also the teachers of the Jewish people. That's why we support them. We know this from the Torah itself. The idea of Maaser Sheni is caring for ourselves, our own spirituality, the body ourselves, making sure that what we do is holy. How do we do that? Because Maaser Sheni, we eat ourselves. We take regular food, we take a tithe from it. That tithe, that 10%, we take to Yerushalayim, either it was redeemed onto coins, and then we buy food there. This was all in temple times, and we consume it there in Yerushalayim. We look after ourselves, our own welfare, the body, the physical body itself, by elevating it, okay? By doing that. And we have Maaser Oni. Maaser Oni is looking after others. The pauper takes, you give something else to someone who is needy. And therefore he says, that is our mission. Look the way he phrases it. We are to build a national life whose material endeavors are devoted to the realization of these purposes. That's how it is. That's what makes our lives as healthy as possible. And therefore, as a result, we have the ability to ask Hashem for those words which conclude this parsha, this section, which you'll look at verse 15, Tesvav, Hashkifa mima'on kodshecha min hashamayim. 5 words. Hashkifa mima'on kodshecha min hashamayim. You should look down, mima'on kodshecha, from your holy habitation, min hashamayim, from heaven, uvarech es amcha es Yisrael, and bless your people Israel. Okay? And this is the ability to do this. So this is the parsha of Vidui Ma'aser. The idea of, and how does this connect with the idea of a journey? Remember, I mentioned at the beginning, both of these first 2 mitzvot, both of these mitzvot are retrospective. The person is standing at a certain point and looking backwards. There's the journey of saying thank you and what it means to give real to real appreciation. This journey asks us, says Rav Hirsch, to consider how we've used our resources in the past and how therefore that will shape our future. That's the idea. That is the idea. Unless we're able to go on that journey backwards, we aren't able to move forwards as well. There is a word that is used in the next part of the parasha, which I think they say is only used once in the whole Torah, and that is the word haskes. Haskate. Have you seen this word before? Okay, look at 27, verse 9. We're not going to see everything. There's the blessings and the curses and Har Gerizim and Har Eval. Look at Pasuk Tes. Moshe and the Kohanim and Leviim said to the Jewish people, saying, Haskes Ushma Yisrael. Haskes Ushma Yisrael. Listen, Yisrael. Today you have become a people to Hashem your God, and you shall listen to Hashem, etc., etc. And then it talks about the blessings that transpire on the Mount Gerizim and Mahar Eval. What is this word haskate? Haskate. So Rashi just says one word, ketargumo. The Targum says the word atzeit, which seems to imply like an intensive form of listening. So it's like how can you say something more than Shema Yisrael? Listen, Israel. Rabbi Sachs's famous translation is shift, in the Siddur, from hear, O Israel, to listen, Israel. He's got a very powerful idea on this. Haskes is really even more intensive listening. But the Seforno says two words which make a very big difference. Says the Seforno, number 5, what does Haskes mean? And he brings a pasuk which supports this, although it's a bit difficult to see how. It's a pasuk from Tanakh. It's a bit difficult to see. You have to understand it, probably that pasuk in more detail. But look at the way he translates the word Haskes. He says it means Tzier b'machshavtecha. Now this is 15th century, right? What does Tzier b'machshavtecha mean? What's a letzayer? To be mitzayer, to draw, to paint, to create an image.
In your image.
Yeah, that's right. Ein sur kelokenu. Chana famously says, right? We say ein kelokenu, right? Ein sur kelokenu. There is no rock like our God. The Gemara in Brachot explaining explaining Chana's prayer to Hashem is, there is no one who is able to form things as you are Hashem, when she prays for a child, etc. You have the ability to create and to form, letzayer. That's what it means, to draw, to create an image. Tzia b'machshavtecha. The Shem Shmuel, moving hundreds of years later, died in 1926, the Sochatchover Rebbe, he says a beautiful explanation of the Sforno. He says, what does the Sforno mean? Hinezeh limud gadol. I'm at the second line of this number 6. This is a great lesson. L'chol haba litzaher. That anyone who comes to purify themselves, anyone who wants to raise their spirituality, sheterem, and go on that journey, sheterem yikrav l'chol davar la'asoseh, that before a person tries to do anything, hein b'torah or b'tefillah, doesn't matter whether it's in learning more, in davening, v'chein afilu b'dvar rishus, it could be something completely optional. This is a life lesson. It's not only spiritual matters, it applies to anything. Lo yeh nivhal la'asoseh, he should not rush and hurry to do it. Terem yitzayer ba'atzmo, hatev as adorahu, until he's able to properly have an image in his mind, l'tzayer, to create a picture, a drawing like an architect in advance before you do it. V'tzirose, its form, v'toalda, what it's going to achieve. V'zeo chastidim horishonim, and that is why the early pious people, says the Gemara in Brachas, hayushayin sha'achas mispalim, they would wait 1 hour and then they would daven. V'afilu k'sheba lishma divrei musar, even if a person is hearing an ethical instruction, words of musar, that encourage us to be greater in life, Yitzayar ba'atzmo mikodem, should first create that image beforehand. Ma'u bol ha'asos, what am I doing this for? What is the purpose? V'zeu haskes ushma, and that is what it means when it says haskate. That's what it means, haskate, to create an image. Shafilu lishmiya tzrichen l'tzayar mikodem. Even when you're going to hear something, first you have to have a picture in your mind, you have to know what you're doing, you have to be ready and prepared in that way. And he says that is why we have Elul. That's what he says. That's why we have Elul before Rosh Hashanah. So that we don't rush into Rosh Hashanah. That we've got a moment beforehand. We know who we're standing in front of. We understand what it means to daven. We understand what it means to hear the shofar, everything else that we do. And in order to do that, we have this month to prepare in this way. So I think it's really, really striking. That explanation is a beautiful explanation. When Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, Haskesu Shema Yisrael, Hayom Hazeh Niyeh Sala'am, today you are a people in front of Hashem, he says it's not good enough just to hear those words. You're going to have to really create an image in your mind of what that represents. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it's a journey. The power of creative imagery. If we want to shape the future, we want to shape our own future, we have to work on an image in our mind of what that looks like. We can't just rush into it. And finally, few brief ideas. We've explained this whole, really most of the shir has been about this idea of being able to look in the past, being able to look retrospectively, to see the journey that you've been on, and that's how you're going to build a better future. That's what the farmer does. That's what the person who brings every 3 years, he wraps up all his Maisa requirements. And then the question is, what do you do when it's too painful to do that? What do you do when the past is too painful? And for that we have the Tochacha, we have the whole admonition, right? These are words which seem almost too painful to read, to say. We relay them, according to our minhag, we lane them slightly quieter. Not everyone agrees with that. Some say you should lane it at the same volume. That's what we do. Slightly quieter because these words are very painful words to hear, and it actually makes people listen better. You notice that everyone listens better when it's quiet. It's a lesson for speaking, right? You're quieter, people listen more. Okay, so 2 brief ideas on this. Rabbeinu Bachya and Sfas Emes, 2 totally different fields. The Rabbeinu Bachya from Rishonim, early 14th century thereabouts, I think, right? And the Sfas Emes, of course, is more recent, 19th century. And he says they're 2 very different ideas. Rabbeinu Bachya says, compare 2 different words. Before you get to the words of the admonition, and you have blessings, beautiful brachot, blessings that the Torah describes. Okay, have a look at chapter 28, verse 2. Okay, it says, "Avo alecha kol habrachos ha'ela v'hisigucha," and all of these brachot will come v'hisigucha, and they will overtake you. When you listen to the voice of Hashem, your God. You see that? V'hisigucha. Now turn to verse 15, which is in the admonition itself. The very first verse of the admonition. If you don't listen to Hashem, then not to keep the commandments, and all these curses will come and they will overtake you. So the parallel, that's the pain. The pain is the parallel, and it carries on like that as well. Instead of Baruch Atah, it says Aurora, right? So this is the pain of it. Rabbeinu Bachya reaches into these psukim and notices one critical difference. What is the difference between these 2 words? There is 1 letter difference. Look carefully and you'll see that the first occasion in the brachot, it does not have a vav. There's no vav. In the second one, v'hisigucha, there is a vav. That's how it's written in the Torah. What is the difference? Molei bevav. V'lo nichtav bebrachas molei. But in the blessings, it's not written with a vav. V'mashe nichtav kan molei. You know why it's written here with a vav? Hashem shenema, because there's a pasuk in Tehillim which says, Imo onochi b'tzara. But Hashem says that I am with you in your pain. He also says it is also in this verse. It is also hinted at in the last letters of the words in this verse. I haven't worked out exactly how that is. It must be he's able to trace the words Imo Anochi B'tzara, I'm with you in pain, and these last the words at the end the last letters. But either way, what he's saying is because it is frightening, it is scary to hear these curses. They shouldn't lose hope. They shouldn't be lost in these curses. Ki Hashem hane'elam, because the hidden name of Hashem, Shechein B'kirbo, is hidden and resting within them, that Hashem Himself is in their pain with us always and protecting us in this way. So in that very first pasuk, in that very first verse, you have the hidden name of Hashem. The idea, that vav there, why the vav specifically, it is not entirely clear, but this, of course, the vav appears in the name of Hashem. Vav is also a connection always. That's what the vav is. The vav is the and. It's a connection. It's a link. It's a chibur, right? That's what a vav is. So in a way, this is I think one perspective when there are no words to say. Meaning, the whole point there is no response to the words of the admonition. There is nothing to say. Other we have many ways. It's too painful to process these words. However, However, we do know that when a person, just to use a parable for a contemporary situation, God forbid a person is sitting Shiva, we know that the one thing that a person can do to bring them comfort is what? Just to be there, to be present. To create what? A chibur, a connection. You can say, it's not what you say. It's not what you say. You go there, you're there, I'm here for you. You say nothing. Of course you can say things sometimes, but sometimes there are no words, and sometimes they don't need words, but they know you're there. And every person who makes that effort to be present, to make a connection, they can be in the depths of despair, but it does a tiny thing to lift their spirits. And that, I think, is what the Rabbeinu Bachai is trying to convey here. In this very first pasuk of the Teichacha, the Vav, with the connection, representing the Vav of Hashem's name, is Hashem saying, I am here. You may not see me. Aster ponai, Hashem's face is hidden. It's something we can't visualize, but at the same time there's a presence. And finally, just to finish with this last idea, we won't have time for the last page, it's okay. Please God, hopefully another time. The Sfas Emes tells us, we got this very famous pasuk in the Teichacha, verse 47, Mem Zayin, Tachas Asher Elvadadas Hashem Lekecha B'Simcha V'Tuv Leivov Mirov Kol, a verse which is hugely discussed. What that means, well, all these things happen because we didn't serve Hashem with simcha, with joy? No, how do we understand that even? Okay, different interpretations. The Sfas Emes goes straight to the point and the positive message this holds for us. Yesh lilmod mizeh, second line. We learn from this. To mikol shekain, how much more so? But midot tova, you see this number 8. But midot tova. When it comes to the positive, when a Jewish people serve Hashem begalut, in exile, besimcha, with joy, afal pishem b'choser kol, even when they are b'choser kol, right? That means the verse says meirov kol. You had so much and you were happy and you forgot Hashem at that moment and you didn't serve Hashem with joy. How much more so when we don't have anything and we're in a depth of despair and things are so bad. Yet we are still able to serve Hashem with simcha. That's what will bring the redemption. And that is why the cause of the exile is written here, later to know how to put it right. To reverse it. That whatever a person, God forbid, faces, whatever we face as a people, the ability to find simcha, find joy in our avodat Hashem, how we serve Hashem, that is the thing that turns everything. That is the thing that transforms everything. And it's a very powerful reflection, because if there's one thing, again, over the past 23 months that we have felt a sense of some form of comfort, it is through our faith. We felt the simcha has come through a connection to who we are as a people, through understanding and strengthening our identity, particularly in Israel, but here too as well. You think of what we felt here on Simchas Torah, what it was last year, even though it was the pain, it was the first anniversary of the Yortzeit, but we came together through a sense of Simcha Shel Mitzvah. That's what we did. We had the joy of the Mitzvah. It's the thing which holds us together, it's the thing which uplifts us, and that is the thing which was, as the Sfas Emes says, that will one day bring the Gula as well. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.